Okay, my dear sisters and brothers, good evening. Another special edition of Wednesday Wellness from the Central United Methodist Church, church at the heart of the city, with the city at heart. This special event, this special time is a discussion looking for and towards tools that can help and benefit us in this COVID-19 era. We're looking for and we're looking forward to our people being able and blessed to overcome some of the stress, strain, and struggle that is this day and time. Thank you so very much for coming. We want to ask you, if you're with us on YouTube, with us at Facebook, please like this. Please share this. Let people know that we're doing something special tonight, because Wednesday Wellness is about help and hope to help people be whole and to be well. With us tonight will be Dr. Nicole Kamek and Dr. Warren Mitchell. We have them because of my friendship, my kinship with my dear brother, the Reverend Ramal Toon, author, entrepreneur, philanthropist, art collector, and so much more. He has a marvelous, indeed, a deep commitment to the mental health of people in general, Black people especially. So I'm proud and pleased. I'm even peacock proud and hallelujah happy to introduce my friend, my brother, the Reverend Ramal Toon. Hey, my man Ramal, so glad you're here with us tonight, brother. How you doing?
Hey.
A little bit about why we're here, and then you can introduce our guest.
Sure. Thanks, Vance. And thank you for organizing this. It's such an important topic and issue for all people, but specifically our communities. And just really grateful to you and for your leadership for pulling together this time for an important conversation. And I believe that people will get some tools. I'm glad they can ask some questions and get some feedback. We have some great therapists with us, but just wanted to share real quick on how we got here. Vance and I were having a conversation about the importance of mental health. We both have experience in working with therapists. In fact, one of the therapists tonight, Warren Mitchell, is my personal therapist. And he's just been a wealth of information and really helpful on my personal healing journey. We also have Dr. Nicole Kamek. But when we were talking about this, we wanted to engage the church specifically, because oftentimes there are stigmas around mental health and faith, and people dealing with the tension of their faith should just be able to take care of everything and they don't need a therapist. But we're trying to close that gap and get rid of that mythology. We've seen hashtags over the months, you know, you can have Jesus and a therapist, and you really can. My premise is that in order to fully live into the life that God has for you, you have to deal with the baggage that you've been carrying. And therapy helps you get rid of that baggage, confront it, heal, and then really live into the beliefs that you have as a Christian, and to receive all that God has for you and believe that you're worthy of it. And believe that you have value, not just in your doing, but in your being. So that's in a nutshell what therapy has done for me and has done for many others. And so we wanted to bring yet another conversation to the church, to give people an opportunity to hear from professionals, their journeys and experiences with their clients, to field questions as people have been dealing with stress and anxieties and hopes and dreams all together in the midst of a pandemic. And the pandemic makes that uniquely different nowadays. So we will have with us, as I mentioned, Dr. Nicole Kamek. She is the founder of BlackMentalWellness.com. I have not met her in person, but I feel like we are friends. We are definitely social media friends. I support Black Mental Wellness that I can, as she and that team are doing across the country. So we're excited to have Dr. Kamek with us. And then we have, so he is here. I have worked with him not only as my personal therapist, but he has also done work with other folks that I know, recommendations, and even with organizations that I have connected with him with. They are both exceptional therapists, and I think you will find value in this conversation. So that's what we are about to do. And Vance, if you have anything else you want to share and guide us to the next step of the agenda.
I certainly do. Thank you. Thank you, Ramal. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. And thanks again, my brother, for being here with us. Family all over Facebook and YouTube wants you to know if you got some questions, please put them in the chat. We're going to try to get to some of those questions later on. We are especially aware that right now, as we're talking, the National Basketball Association is in the midst of an immediate boycott because of what's happened in the twin pandemic to COVID-19 of white supremacy, racism, and the way it has erupted right here and right now. Some of the feelings go from isolation and hurt and sadness and depression to anger, to fury, to rage because of this latest video murder. We know not what has happened since then. And so it's vitally important that we have this conversation. Thank you all for being here. Please send questions as you would. We're going to begin our conversation now. We're going to have Dr. Kamek and Dr. Mitchell come on. And our producer, Brother Nelson, is going to bring them on. And then Ramal is going to begin our questioning. Welcome, Dr. Mitchell. Welcome, Dr. Kamek. We're so very, very glad that you're here with us at Wednesday Wellness for the Central United Methodist Church. Again, we're the church at the heart of the city. We're the city at heart. And we're so glad that you are here because these are difficult, tumultuous days. And there has been in our community, you know better than we do as professionals, a sort of shunning of mental health and of therapy. Ramal and I are two that have been blessed by it. But we have you here, and we want to open this up with a couple of questions. And Ramal is going to begin. You please take your time to respond with this. We've got between 60 and 90 minutes, so we don't have to rush. We want to be sure we spend some time and help our community to be at this point in time. Again, thank you for coming. Back to you, Ramal.
Yeah, so thanks again. And Warren and Nicole, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate both of you and your leadership as you run your organizations and engage, help them on their journeys to wholeness. So I wanted to just start with the first question around, from your perspective, and not only as therapists, but as Black therapists dealing with people in these. And maybe, Nicole, you could respond to this question first in regards to why you think conversations like this are important as a culture around mental health and the pandemic and all of the dynamics happening in our society. And from therapy as a Black woman.
Okay. There are so many reasons why we should be having these conversations. And I think most importantly, if we look at how the stigma of mental health in the Black community has led to, in a lot of ways, that poor mental health, right? So a lot of it is people holding things in internally or being too ashamed to ask for help. And what we see is that oftentimes that results in people seeking help when their symptoms are so much more severe. And also people just feeling isolated. And one of the things that I think we can all do is as we have more open conversations and discussions about mental health, that you begin to normalize what it means. So, you know, something as simple as, oh, my therapist said, allow someone like, wait, that person goes to therapy? Oh, what happened? How was it? When you hear about experiences, you expand what people think about mental health, that it doesn't have to be, you know, oftentimes that stigmatizing language, oh, you're crazy or something must be wrong. But when you hear people go into therapy, you hear that they're having these positive outcomes, you make it so that other people feel safe to do the same. And I think that's especially important in these times with exactly what you said. Black people were already disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And then on top of that, adding all of the racial injustices. That has an impact on all of us.
Yeah, I was also thinking about it through the lens of the fact that, you know, we are very communal people. And now the only way we get together is online. And even, you know, Vance and I have talked about this doing another one of these in a few months, because speaking of being communal people, Thanksgiving's coming. And that adds a whole nother layer of, you know, stress mentally and emotionally on folks. But Warren, I want to hear your response to the question too, in terms of why you think these types of conversations are important. Again, from a therapist perspective, but also as a Black man dealing with the dynamics that are happening in our society. As Vance pointed out, we just had yet another NBA postponing games. You know, why is therapy so important right now, and people to engage?
Yeah, I do believe. Thank you for the invitation. I do believe it's the crucial and important for us to engage in these kind of dialogues, especially during times like this, to talk about the reality of the pain that a lot of people are in, creating safe spaces, as Dr. Nicole mentioned, talking about it in ways where we can normalize that. Talking about emotional pain, it should be on the same level as talking about physical pain and health issues. And so given spaces where people can vent, people can hear other people sharing and say, oh, it's just not, I'm not the only one going through this. And the people who are sharing also look like me. And it helps that they recognize that their stuff, their pain is relatable to others, that they're not isolated. One of the challenges we have in our community is that makes therapy and going to therapy a stigma, is that if I talk about my emotions, I'm crazy. If I have to go to somebody else and can't deal with it on my own, that means I'm weak, especially as a man, and a Black man in particular, that I should be able to handle my own. And when we hear and see other people like us who are sharing and talking about their own struggles, their own pain, their vulnerabilities, it helps to definitely normalize and make it okay for me to say, wow, I need some help too. Maybe I should talk to my friend who I know is in therapy and see how to go about getting into therapy. There's so much pain that we've had prior to just COVID-19, that COVID-19 has just become almost, it's a heavy feather, but the last feather straw that is breaking the camel's back, is breaking our of many of us. And with the civil unrest, with the systemic racism that's going on right now, these are pain that I believe are the collective consciousness of the people we've been carrying for years. And these things that are going on right now are just finally just breaking open this barrier that we've been keeping, helping us keep that pain at bay. And right now it's just like, no more. I can't do this no more. And so, but people need healthy ways to be able to express that, because if they don't, then that can come out and be self-destructive itself. So we need spaces like this to talk about the value of therapy and how to go about taking ownership and responsibility of our own pain and not passing on.
Yeah, that's a good word. You know, one of the things you helped me to realize is that there's no badge of honor for carrying baggage, right? You know, and burdens, and, you know, keeping pain at bay. It's not an honorable thing. But I'm mindful that, you know, that's always been our daily experience. We've had our tools for keeping the pain at bay on a daily basis, you know, every time we walk out the door. You know, as we're just mindful, it's almost like a subconscious checklist of making sure, you know, you have ID and where are you going, and you look at, are you dressed for where you're going? Will you be safe, and how will it be interpreted by people? It's just an automatic checklist for a lot of people that we don't always realize is stress. But we're so used to it. We're used to, the stress is now, we're just used to it. And that's not healthy. In that regard, Warren, what has it been like since the beginning of the pandemic? Your experience, have you seen an increase and requests for sessions? Have the dynamics changed around the conversations? And are you actually seeing any more men lately?
Good question. It's definitely been a significant increase. I'm full like 2 weeks out with clients. And a lot more people are calling in that I have to turn away or refer them to other therapists. And part of that is when people come in initially, it's not necessarily talking about the pandemic or the racial injustice, but whatever the presenting issue is, one of the things that they do eventually talk about is how much this is bothering them, how much this is affecting them and causing some challenges for them at home. And so while the presenting issue may not be, I'm calling because I'm struggling with the pandemic or the civil unrest, I'm struggling with marital issues, I'm struggling with my relationship with my parent or my child. But underneath that or alongside of that, most people are talking about this challenge. And even in before the pandemic hit, there was something else that was going on for a lot of people nationwide. And there was the death of Kobe that people were still struggling, and his daughter, people were still struggling with. And then we had the pandemic. And then we had all the stuff, the killing of so many Black folks and the civil unrest. So there's a lot of unresolved issues that are here. So a lot of men are still coming in by way of their wives or their girlfriends, or by work, because their work may be recommending them for them to get some help because of some of the challenges they're dealing with. But even alongside that, they're talking about their challenges with not knowing how to fix this, with not knowing where to go and how to deal with this. And so this process, whatever it brings them in, also allows them opportunities to talk about things they've never talked about before. And many men start referring other men because they realize this is actually a safe place. They're not going to be badged or put down for coming into therapy.
Yeah, I've found that conversations with men have shifted because all of the activities of being busy no longer exist. So
Right.
We're gonna have to talk about things that aren't shallow anymore, right?
Right.
We got to check on each other and really care because it's serious. Sports are limited. You're not going to hang out. I have a couple of social distance. One person. Sitting at least 6 feet. I'm real serious about this thing, but the conversations have shifted. I know more brothers are definitely, asking questions about therapy and going and seeing someone. But you mentioned, marriage. I'm like, look here, I just got married last year. They didn't tell me the first year we're gonna be locked in the house for the whole dang on year. That's like, that's different. There's Rona. There's the first year, and then there's put Rona on top of it, and there's more than a notion. I was used to going outside, but it creates a different dynamic, right?
Right.
And a dynamic where getting to know someone is accelerated.
Right.
And I think in some ways, getting to know yourself is almost not necessarily accelerated, but you can't run anymore because you're home. And I've watched everything on Netflix twice. So I would imagine other people are dealing with those same dynamics and then are realizing, hey, maybe it's time for me to talk to someone. Nicole, what has your experience been like? And have you seen an increase in clients? And have you seen, and how has the conversation shifted?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you mentioned the relationship part. I work with veterans. And so we were in a meeting like last week, and it's like, wait, we have had such an increase in people seeking support for marriages at this time. And you think about all the additional stressors with children being home, everyone working from home, dealing with the impact of all of this on the individual and the family. Of course, people will be having some sort of distress, but I always think about the beautiful part of this is that I am seeing an increase in Black people seeking therapy at a time where we would want them to,
right.
And being able to normalize that. And because I work with veterans, I primarily work with men, so a lot of Black men, and it was exactly what you said. They came in about stress. Oftentimes when men come in and with veterans, they either say stress or trauma. They will not admit to anything like it's not depression, it's not anxiety, it's not, I don't need help. I'm just dealing with stress and trauma. But then when they sit in the room and you start to unpack what that looks like, what are you really feeling? And they start to think about, you know, my father went through this, I went through this, my son is going through it. What do we do? So those conversations and being intentional about that. Something else that's happened is like an increase in drinking, which is just, I think, an indicator of where the stress is. And so being able to create those safe spaces so that people can find other ways of coping with what's happening right now. But it's definitely been an increase. And I'm always trying to get people to expand what their experiences are, and that is not always just trauma, but we just need to get them in the room.
Vance, you have a few questions, but Nicole, you made me think about how men, you know, we will not say, oh, it's depression or I'm sad. Like sad is like definitely like we're not sentenced in reference to ourselves. You know, it's just a tough day. You know, I'm gonna be all right type of language. But I have found with good therapists, you know, with the Jedi mind tricks, I start asking questions, and I'm able to open up, and I'm sure other people feel that weight lifted when the questions are asked in such a way that you're able to really share in safe space. And I'm just curious, Vance, as we pivot to you and the next few questions about the two of you and your experiences with people bringing their faith into the conversations these days. And have you seen an increase in that where people are, you know, coming in for sessions, but have you seen any pivots in the faith conversation, or is it a part of the conversation?
That's what I mean about being a smart brother. You already grabbed it. Go ahead. Y'all go ahead. Do it. Do it.
Yeah, definitely a lot more people within my framework and the model that I work. I allow people to bring their spirituality as a part of the healing and treatment process. So people are definitely talking about more. Some people from the part of end times, looking at Corona and some of the other stuff that are coming, and others is just needing a safe space where they can trust that somebody has this under control, because it looked like the powers that be here don't seem to know what's going on, and so greater need to lead some sort of energy substance being that knows what's going on and that I can trust, because I don't know what's going on, and that can make people feel very insecure and stir up a lot of insecurities for people. And so God then becomes a major part of the discussion because of this, that we don't know what's going on. It might be revelation. It might be such and such. So I need to get my life together. I need to develop my prayer time more. And even what I do is trying to get people to build a foundation based on who they are and whose they are. And so that they're not building a foundation trying to avoid the illness. They're not trying to build a foundation to try to avoid stress. They're trying to build a foundation in being their best selves. And in being their best selves, stress becomes a barrier that prevents it from happening. The illness might become a barrier that prevents that from happening. And so that's the approach I take in trying to get people to take better care of themselves.
Dr. Nicole, if you had experiences with faith.
Yeah, one of the first questions that I ask in that initial appointment is if spirituality and religion is important to the person. Because you just want to like open up that space that you can talk about that here. And if it is important to you, what about it is important? What are those spiritual practices that you use in your day-to-day life? Is it going to church? Is it reading the Bible? Is it some people, you know, it's just being in nature and having prayer. What is it? Because we're going to use those strategies and those components that's important to you to help you cope with what's happening right now. And I think it just sort of opens it up to say, you can have, like you were saying, you know, you see the memes and it's like, you can, you know, go to church and have a therapist and all of that. No, you really can. And they don't have to be these separate entities. And I think when you bring in the therapy space, those things that are important to that individual, they feel heard, they feel seen. And then the therapy feels more specific to them and what they're experiencing. And so I think the buy-in and then the outcomes will always be better. So those are things that I always ask. And then I keep a mental note. I don't know how I remember all of this stuff sometimes because I can't remember my own life, but I keep a mental note. So then when things come up in those sessions, I'm able to pull back from what they told me. Like, what would you do with this? How would prayer help you in this moment? What are some prayers that would help you? And, sort of use their words in the session.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. But because I'm pastor, and because I pastor an erudite, credentialed, wonderful group of people, I don't run into this as much, but I have run into persons who believe that Jesus is all they need. And if I have Jesus, I have all that I need. And what we're seeing is there's great difficulty. We want to be sure we invite, well, right now, thank you. We want to be sure we invite our listeners, our viewers, please send some questions in. We'd love to be able to share this in your network. We want to be sure that people get a piece of this action, if you would.
Mm-hmm.
Let me get back to this. So, Doctors Nicole and Warren, when you've got people who have so entrenched themselves in what they call faith, that they may not involve themselves in a therapy they need. How, well, two parts to this. What reasoning can we give for people to begin to think about this differently so there's not oppositional to faith, one? And then secondly, how is it that we might be able to invite them into the therapeutic relationship?
Nicole, you want me to go or you want to go?
I'll go. I mean, I use a simple approach. I don't know. You might come with something very, but I often say to people, God created therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers in the same way that you think about any other medical provider. And so, as we're not meant to deal with this on our own. So the same way, and I always use things that may apply. So I primarily see veterans in a primary care setting. So oftentimes they're there for like high blood pressure, diabetes, things like that. So I say to them, when your blood pressure is high, what do you do? Oh, there's a whole procedure of what you do. You're checking your blood pressure each day and keeping track of it. There's medication you have to take. There are certain foods that your primary care provider told you to stop eating. You're exercising more. And when you feel like you're doing all of that and it's not stable and you're still not having the numbers that you should, you call your primary care provider. You come in for an appointment and you get a tune-up based on whatever that doctor prescribes. So how about we look at therapy in the same way? How can you this is just a tune-up. Like, you can still believe in God, you can still have your faith, you can still trust in God, but now you're also utilizing these additional resources to help you manage. So that's sort of the approach I take with a lot of people. I think something that does help is I'm in a primary care, like I'm in a hospital, but I'm in a primary care clinic. So in a lot of ways they justify it like, well, this is, they see me as an extension of their provider. But that's always like my starting place.
Vance, I think you're muted.
Excuse me, Dr. Mitchell. Thank you, Ramon. Dr. Mitchell, did we lose him?
I don't see him, but I did
want to
to that. Vance, one of the things your question made me think of was I do know people who will, make the comment, all I need is Jesus. Well, Rona has made it so. You locked in the house now, and how's that working out? But because we are created for a relationship, and I think the environment has shown us how much we need relationship and connection. And that, as a person of faith, as a follower of Jesus, you need Jesus in your life, but you need human connection. And that is quite clear for a lot of people now. And it's really just great to hear folks are coming to you and sharing their faith journey and sharing the other challenges that they're having, and realizing that the two are not in opposition. In fact, there is emotional healing and spiritual healing, and the two together can really create quite an amazing life.
Indeed. Thank you, Ramal. Thank you. Dr. Mitchell, how do you respond to that? How do we get people who are saying, just give me Jesus? They're in the spiritual. Just give me Jesus.
Well, if we look even in the scriptures, we see how many times Jesus sent people to other people. God sends people to other people to get blessed, to hear his word, to get specific instructions. That, as Ramal indicated as well, we are a communal species. We need connection. And God is going to speak to us most of the time through somebody else, through some sort of interaction, some sort of engagement with somebody else. And that's how we can really challenge what we believe God is telling us, and practice it in ways, practicing love. You know, we need Jesus to help us to love another person, but we have to love the other person.
Yeah.
And not say, well, I'm just going to love Jesus and hopefully Jesus will pass my love on to you. No, we have to be directly involved with other people. And so with regards to therapy, God has blessed us with many gifts and many skills. And what's the purpose of that? Is to bring us closer to who we are and whose we are. But we have to engage with those people and utilize and trust their skill set to help us in evolving and being our better selves. And so it's important to recognize the value of connecting with others. We see people, we see even Jesus, how much he valued his relationship with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, that he went out to just hang out. That was part of his therapy for himself, to just be just home, feel at home, and how much that helped him. Even when we look at Garden of Gethsemane, where he was depending on his disciples to be there for him, and how much it hurt for him when they weren't there for him. That if it was just about God being there for God, I don't need them. But like 2-3 times he went back to check, like he needed their support. And I think we need to take that into consideration, of the value of relationships and connections, and trusting people with the God-given gifts that God has, provided for us to help each other with.
I pray
that was profound.
I pray that our viewers, it was profound. I pray that our viewers are listening to this one. We've got faith-filled therapists here who know the book.
Go ahead, Nicole.
To the fundamental connection that Ramal was discussing, that you illustrated biblically. Now, Dr. Nicole, we don't want to be sure we knock you out. Please come back to what you were going to say.
It was 2 things from what you said. One, how you said like God will use people or situations to get the message to you. I feel like as a therapist, that happens to me all the time. Like so many times I'm in the space with a client and I'm like, ooh, that was for me.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily always know that, but I think it's exactly what you're saying. I can be speaking to a person and I'm like, that really was for me. Okay, I got it. But another thing that we did, and it actually worked well, I do a lot of work with women veterans who have experienced a traumatic event or events in the military. And one thing that we learned is for these women, and for our groups, they were primarily Black women, that it was a very, I feel like when trauma happens to you personally, it can be like a very spiritual experience. Just meaning like you start to not feel safe in your body and you question everything. You question God. What is your purpose? Why did this happen? And so something that we did as psychologists is we met up with a chaplain, and we ended up having these groups with the chaplain there. And I think it was just nice to have that combination of both a psychologist and a chaplain in the room. But it also allowed, and it was a group, so we did it for like 12 weeks, I think. It also allowed the women to express like and go on these spiritual journeys, but then to feel safe talking about it and having that mix of, you know, this is how it's impacted me mentally, this is how it's impacted me spiritually. And it really opened it up for a lot of women. We started to start our, you know, our sessions in whichever way that they felt comfortable, whether it was meditation or prayer. We would have like rituals being a part of it. And it was something like where I feel like oftentimes they want us to stick to these very strict evidence-based theories and models of doing therapy. And it's like, hey, when you listen to the people and you give them what they need and in a way that they need, they respond and they start to heal. So that was a very intentional way that we used, like we worked with a chaplain to combine both fields.
Yeah, I was going to say, Warren, one of the things when you were talking about Jesus as an example, it made me want to go back and look at different passages of scripture where you can see Jesus engaging in self-care.
Right.
We don't really talk about Jesus through the lens of self-care and as a model of self-care. And he, you know, when you think about the words of Jesus, oftentimes there were no gray areas. You know, he'd be like, "I'm out. I'm going to be by myself. I'll be back." You know? And he didn't have to explain himself. And you know, we tend to think sometimes we have to justify why we need time alone, as if it gives other people the power to then validate if it's okay for us to have that time or not.
Right.
But, you know, we have the authority to make that decision for ourselves, and as adults, we don't have to ask for permission.
This is Rich. This is Rich. Thank you all. A couple of things come to mind, but I don't want to lose this one. Right now, with the boycotts at the NBA, I've talked with a couple of my friends, and there is fundamental rage. And the people I've been talking to today are pastoral leaders, and they're pastoral leaders in the United Methodist Church. Yes, I'm going to be straight up about this. And we have people racialized as white, as we are racialized as Black, who have been very, very adamant around some things, but they have been eerily silent around these things, these murders. They showed up for a little bit with George Floyd, but I haven't heard them as much today. They may be speaking now, but I haven't heard them today. When this rage gets into our people, in addition to the pandemic, in addition to being locked in the house with somebody, what are some tools we can use to funnel it correctly, or let me see, adequately, appropriately, so that the rage does not spill out in inappropriate and dangerous ways?
Yeah, I think it's very helpful, very needed for us, again, creating safe spaces where people can just be honest about how they're feeling, just the raw feelings without it being censored. People need to release that. But I think overall, what's going to help us, I think if we can rally around some sort of mission that relates to us as a people and how we are to go forward in utilizing strategic ways in how to make changes happen, it's going to be helpful versus just, you know, having protests and just being out there. Well, if we're in this for the long haul, we need to strategize. We need to find a way to utilize this energy that's being stirred up right now to strategically identify areas that are causing us pain, but also how to make valuable use of the energy and people who want to do something about it. What can we do? What's a mission? What are we about? Who are we as a people? What are we about? And it's so important that we recognize that, because without that, we're just making noise, and that noise is also stirring up unresolved pain that we have that has nothing to do with the pandemic directly, right? may have something to do with the civil unrest based on the years of dealing with that, but it has to do with a lot of even childhood pain or pain that you've gone through and unresolved. This has become a scapegoat for some people to release pain that has nothing directly to do what's going on. So we have to be careful. Just because you're enraged, it doesn't mean it's because of the pandemic or the civil unrest. It could be your own stuff that you haven't been dealing with, and now you're going to use this as an opportunity to release, and we have to be mindful of that.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I think, as you were saying that, I probably lived before getting into therapy under the mantra and meditation of "I wish somebody would." It was like just because of it was like a daily meditation. Like, I wish somebody would. But this moment, all of that stuff, been carrying, and it's just built up and haven't been dealt with. The social unrest, the pandemic, and all those things just become a release, and I can bear witness to that and realize, like, wow, some of this, what I'm feeling, is just my stuff, and I now get to put my stuff on this situation. It doesn't make the situation less valid, but I've carried a lot of anger for a long time. Nicole, did you want to respond to that? And then we can go ahead and take some questions, Vance?
Yeah.
Something I remind people, and it is what you said, it's like the buildup. Like, we store trauma in our bodies, right? And so when that happens and these different situations come up, whether it's your direct experience or not, it may trigger some of those previous traumas that you've had. And so in addition to it's been interesting because in addition to us, connecting to organizations and feeling like I'm going to impact this movement, people have also sort of naturally just gravitated back to history to sort of learn what in the past has been done, what strategies were successful, how did they get through those times, and how can we apply that to the right now. And then the general strategies that I always recommend for everything is because we store it in our bodies, we have to move, we have to get active. What are some things that you can do? I know it's a pandemic, but you can still walk outside. You can, you can exercise online. You can do, yoga, if that's your thing. You can have a basketball workout, whatever it is, but get that energy moving. And then I always ask people, when you're feeling your best, when you're feeling your happiest, what are you doing? Who are the people around you? Who are you talking to? What type of activities are you doing? And we're going to use that to think about how to cope right now.
Oh, that's good. Thank you so very much. We're going to take some questions now. Thank you all so much for that. That's just blessings. Got a couple of questions we want to share with you and see your response to this. Carolyn West, thank you. She's written, what are some key behaviors and reactions to watch for in children and teens during this pandemic in light of changes in school, news of death and sickness, and all the other things that come along with this time? What are some key behaviors that we need to look for in our children and our teenagers? Any of you?
When I think of those major changes, is if there are any personality changes or behavioral changes that are just so different from how your child would normally be, that's a key indicator that something has shifted. There's something that is impacting your child. So for example, and some of this is probably you have to take it in context of COVID, because I also hear about teenagers or kids staying up later at night, right? But if your child is sleeping all day, or doesn't want to do those normal things. Maybe you all would normally watch movies together, or you would talk, and your child is just isolating more, not wanting to do that. Or if you're noticing that your child is crying more, or significant changes in eating, when you notice those types of mood shifts, I think that's a good indicator of have a check-in with your child just to see how are things going. And I think a lot of times as parents, we may want to have those surface level conversations because it can feel a little uncomfortable. How are you doing? You're okay? Okay, good. I did my part. I checked off. They're okay. No, have a real conversation with your child. I noticed you're sleeping all day. What's going on? Or I noticed you haven't been talking to your friends as much. Has anything happened? So start to put those specific questions out there so that it at least encourages some back and forth dialogue with you and your child.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Brother Warren.
Yes. So, in addition to that, some kids may, and even adolescents, may appear to be wanting your attention more, maybe more needy. They're looking for some sort of security, to letting them know that even if the powers that be on the outside don't know what's going on, are we going to be okay? And so it's important for the parents then to make sure that they're dealing with their stuff, because they might see that added need for the child as a stressor for them, and they might look to avoid it, like Nicole talked about, with regards to, like, just doing the brief check-in, and as long as they say they're okay, whew, I'm good, I did my parent thing. And rather than recognizing that your child needs you present, they don't necessarily need you with answers, they need you present. And so be mindful of when they want more of your attention, even if it's to play video games with them, going for a walk with them, sitting in the same space with them. Those are things that maybe you can do to try and help them. Some might be looking to get lost in their video games as a way of coping. Just like maybe with adults and others, they might look to drinking and using drugs more. Some kids might play their video game a whole lot more without taking breaks, and challenge them to take breaks so that they can just check in with themselves, check in with everybody, other members of the family, and to challenge them to go outside and, as Dr. Nicole mentioned, to be active. Go for a walk the dog, do something, rather than just staying stuck into that one space.
Thank you for that. As we prepare to take another question. Oh, that's so relational. Thank you so very much. Here's another question from Bridget Denise Young Ross. I know her from somewhere. How do we explain to folks the difference between a Christian counselor and a licensed therapist? That's my wife, y'all. How do we explain to folks the difference between a Christian counselor and a licensed therapist? That's awfully important. That really is important for people of faith, because the Christian moniker can sometimes lead us someplace else. How would we do that? Any of the three of you? Ramal, you can kick in here too.
I'll share as a novice, someone who just experiences therapy and loves it and passionate about it, and which is why I work with our two leaders here. But that question is a trigger for me, because my first therapist was through a church, and it was an epic fail. That it was Christian therapy. And I'm going to sometimes have the challenge of putting everything into a box, right? Like you have one experience with a church or with a person in a church, and it becomes how you talk about the whole church. So that's not what I'm doing. My first interaction was in a context where there were several Christian therapists who really lacked professionalism of confidentiality. The familiarity of context almost made it okay to share things that they shouldn't be sharing with each other, and within the context of that faith community. So I don't think that happens in every context. Of course, I know of churches that have really good therapy ministries, but I think there are people who have had my experience where that was their start. And it was one of the wounds of their church hurt, where it was not safe space, because sometimes the faith environment has loose boundaries around what people can get away with when it comes to professionalism and confidentiality. And so I chose after that to deal with it didn't have to be about, are you a Christian or not? I just wanted a professional who was good at their job. My faith was one thing, my emotional state, my mental health was another thing. And as both of our therapists have pointed out, most of my trauma, if not 98% of it, had nothing to do with my faith. It had a whole lot to do with my life experiences. And I wasn't trying to, sprinkling some Jesus on it wasn't working. I needed to really deal with some stuff. And I then, was able to find therapists who happened to be Christian. And I was able to see the connection, as Nicole pointed out. She'll use what someone says about their faith as a way to engage them. And as Warren and I will have conversations in our sessions where we'll talk about faith. And then sometimes it's just You know, he's talking to me like another grown man who's confronting me on my stuff, which is one of the things I like about him, is that he's very direct. And I've had therapists in other settings that, you know, if they weren't direct, I was going to dance around every question. That's my personal experience with it. And I acknowledge that it was a trigger, and even in the question, because of a past experience that made me think about a not so good experience with a quote unquote Christian therapist.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Nicole, Dr. Warren, after that sprinkling Jesus comment, please help us some, because the Jesus sprinkle won't help. He said it, man. I'm just.
He did say it. I think to add to that, because you summed it up perfectly, and maybe another piece to add is the differences in training that may come into place. And so thinking of level of severity and what it is that the person is dealing with. So there are some things that you may be dealing with that may require that more higher level of training or clinical experience. And I don't know, like maybe there are some church counselors who have different levels of experience, but I would imagine like some of that would go to, can that provider really treat and help me to deal with what this mental health concern is? And one thing that licensed providers have is that confidentiality. So we can't share that with the church, or we're not going to hold it against you for some future events or things like that. So I would think those would be some additional differences.
Okay. Warren? Dr. Warren, do you have anything to add?
I would agree with what both Roman and Dr. Nicole indicated. People have called me and asked me, am I a Christian counselor? Well, like I'm a Christian, and I use that as a part of the work that I do. But I guess I'm funny about being labeled as a Christian counselor, in the sense that other people who may not be Christians or have had church hurt will have issues with coming to a Christian counselor. And they can come to me and receive another perspective of a person who is Christian and is actually treating them in the professional manner and in the way that they want to be treated. So I'm cautious of that. So I agree with everything else that both Ramal and Nicole indicated.
Okay, I'm so grateful for the serious way in which you take Christian faith, and yet you're willing to offer this analysis so that we don't get stuck in something that claims to be Christian, but actually can be very, very harmful. So Ramal talked about church hurt. That's pain. That's pain we deal with all the time. Sandra, question.
And in that same way, Vance, I will say, you know, and because of therapy, I've also been able to acknowledge my role in some of my church hurt. And a part of it was also being mad at the church, because, you know, people always, you know, want to kick the church and then get mad when the church kicked back. And I think sometimes I was mad that the church kicked me back. So there is that place when you're not mature enough where you think you can get away with kicking the church, and then the church don't play that. And then you get offended and caught in your feelings. So it goes both ways. And as much as we have expectations of our faith communities, the faith community has expectations of us. And, you know, I've spent time reflecting on my past and was like, oh, that wasn't me being mad at them for anything they did. I was just mad that they actually hit me back, and I didn't like it. So, and when we're talking about our faith, we kind of have to own our own roles and some of our stuff that led to our church hurt.
I'm grateful that Reverend Ramal Toon just showed up, and that Reverend Toon made sure we know that there's another side to this. I'm grateful for that. We had a couple of questions come up. One that just came up is from Sandra Taylor. Do you have any advice you'd give to parents for how to address their children with some of the things that are going on right now? What information are you sharing with parents to help their children cope during this time? Because she says wisely, sometimes children are left out of the conversation. And then we have one from Pam Carr, but let's do this one first. Thank you, Sandra. And Ms. Pam next.
Yes, I think that creating, again, that's I think that's so powerful, creating safe spaces where kids can express how they are and check in with them. How are you really feeling about what's going on. Don't just ask like, how are you doing? But what are your thoughts about what's going on with the pandemic? What are your thoughts about what's going on with the civil unrest? And to wait for them to speak. And they might give at first, if this is not a familiar discussion for them, they might give like a one-word type of answer. Don't just give in to that. They try to give them more opportunities to express different thoughts, different things. What are your friends thinking about it? What are your friends saying about it? Have you noticed anything on TV about it? And what did that trigger anything for you? So just creating safe spaces where kids could just be themselves about it, and don't be afraid to bring it up. They're being exposed to it. They're seeing it, whether it be on their social media or somewhere. They're exposed to it in some sort of way, and you want to make sure you provide as much accurate information to them as possible. Support ways that you can help, encourage them to participate in some routines. If it's not a normal routine, create a structure that they can follow that can help their mind be less stressful in trying to figure out what should I do next, because they'll just revert to what's easy. And that might be video games, that might be their phone, that might be watching TV. Just give some structure in place and put it on the board somewhere where they can see this is what we can do, especially as a family, and some freedom to do what I want to do on my own. And be careful of the amount of negativity they're exposed to on TV or on social media. Check in with them to encourage them to not participate in that. Just because everybody else is talking about it doesn't mean you have to continue watching a lot of these things.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Nicole and Ramal, if you want to. Dr. Nicole.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. And I use myself in the situation so that people can see that I'm not just saying to do these things. So with my daughter is 7, but she was having a reaction. And even when I limited what she could see, she saw some stuff on TV and she was having a response to it. And being able to have those honest conversations with your child in an age appropriate manner of, this is affecting me too, because the power that we have as parents is we can serve as models to show our children that, one, I'm impacted by this, and these are some ways that I'm going to cope with it. And showing those healthy ways of coping so that your child can also learn those things. And so I did exactly what you said, Warren. Like I feel like she was worrying a little too much. And I'm like, oh, wait, we have to remember that children have had significant life changes. She's a child who was in school. She was doing soccer. She was in mad science. She's swimming. She's dancing, and everything was taken from her. And so being able to say, I get it. We need to add a schedule. We got like a dry erase board, and we came up with, what are those activities? We're going to do our daily walks. You're going to read. You're going to, she can talk to her friends, whatever it is, figuring out how to have those schedules and things in place. And then I always check in. How is it going? What do we need to do? We started doing like movie nights on Friday. So every Friday, I know we're going to be together. We're going to talk. It's going to be eat what you want. I don't care. On Sundays, we started doing cooking lessons with my aunt who's in Richmond. And so we learn in soul food. And I feel like she wouldn't have taught me this if I was in Richmond. So we're taking advantage of the opportunity, but really trying to find other ways of connecting. And I always remind her, like, when it's like, oh, this sucks. It's like, yeah, this sucks. But look at the things that we were able to learn about each other, or look at what the skills we were able to get, or I wouldn't have had this much time with you. So showing your kids as a model, I think is just as powerful as, what we say as well.
Good. Thank you. Got another question. You want to say?
I was just, in my experience with my kids, I spend, more time talking to them now. And, my kids are practically grown. My daughter's 21, my son is 20. And, but we've been doing a lot of work on our own story of, life together and their experiences with me before my own healing journey, and creating the space for them to, share stuff that they've probably been holding. And what's odd has been, I've had to tell my son in those conversations, you don't have to protect me from myself. I know who I was. And so everything you're going to say, I already know the kind of man I used to be, and it's okay. I just don't want you carrying my stuff. And so it has helped us create a space for hard but necessary conversations that have really just made our relationships way better than they were.
Thank you, Ramal. Thank you. Here's another question. Have either of you as therapists had any experience providing therapy to a congregation? And if so, could you talk some about those experiences?
I haven't had that experience.
Neither have I. Not to a congregation.
If you could think about that, if you could posit that as a place to add some mental, emotional, spiritual health, you would dream about that. What would it look like? What would it feel like for you? How might that be done?
Oh, you're asking hard questions. I think a start, honestly, I was thinking like a congregation. That could be really big. And there are different ways that you could do that. Part of it could just be providing, just as this is, right? Providing a space and an outlet to talk about what these are the issues. I know that you're dealing with them. We're going to provide a space for you to have access to these panelists. Now ask your questions. I think that's one avenue of bringing mental health into the space. And then you can do that in different ways. I mean, I guess virtually now, but you can think about that even for the youth in the church. You can think about it for different members, especially like I've been thinking a lot about, you know, how we've been talking about we're very communal and just that isolation. Church for a lot of people is family. That's where you get that social connection. And so being able to bring that to members and discussing those things, I think would be good. And then other things is like providing resources for the congregation, like how that is something, even my home church, like they reached out to me and I will never forget. I'm not going to say the name of the church, but when I graduated, he was like, oh, she's a shrink. And then like COVID hit and it was like, oh, Dr. K-Mac, come on over. We need some resources. And to me, I was like, that is the growth, like the idea that the church is asking during COVID, what do we need to do? I was so excited. So I think like being open and having those conversations could be very good for a church. And then maybe other things that could happen over time would look like having some groups maybe at the church and having people have those smaller sections to have those discussions could be healing.
Thank you. I knew you could dream about it, but Warren, dream with us a little bit.
Well, I would, as a creative idea, I think maybe one Sunday, the pastor could make this day Mental Health Day, and maybe have a therapist come and speak on a specific mental health issue and educate the congregation about it, and maybe even have breakout groups where we can go and talk about specific issues within those breakout groups, and having people have smaller safe spaces they can be open and honest about it, and then maybe coming back again and talking about what that experience was like for them, and then providing resources for therapists that are available. So just giving them a brief intro to how a therapy session could be, but even having a therapist speak the word about mental health and that giving the congregation an education on the value of mental health and God meeting people through their mental health. We talk about, Paul talked about the transformation of the mind. That's a psycho-spiritual process. It's not just something you pray overnight or it comes. Transformation means a period of time, and there's psychological. A great deal of what Jesus talked about was about psychology. We just spiritualize it or religious. How we say that word? Because Jesus said it, and when in reality it's a lot of psychology. Doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. And serving. Especially doing unto others that you have them do unto you, or love your neighbor as yourself. Like these are actually psychological stuff of self-care. Love your neighbor as what? As you love yourself. That means, what does that mean for me to love myself? So even having sermons on what that looks like, and the value of it and the responsibility that each member has to take care of themselves before they go out trying to serve all these other people and thinking that that's all they need to do. And then they ignore home, they ignore themselves. So having sermons around stuff like that can make it more practical and may not be necessarily labeled as therapy, but definitely mental health. Yeah.
I love the idea of a mental health awareness Sunday. And
Me too. I love that.
that's doable. And I thought about, through Clear Story, Warren and I, in fact, we've done it at Central with you, Vance, where you invited us to do a workshop on a Saturday. And it was great attendance. And so it shows that there's a clear need or at least desire to learn. And, your folks showed up and it was a great session. And Warren and I have done that with a number of churches. But that it is always typically a Saturday. But to bring mental health to the Sunday experience, yeah, I would agree in sermon, but also in changing the paradigm to literally using the sermonic moment as a conversation. Jesus is still in the midst when it's not a traditional format. If it's about healing, Jesus is in it. So it would require, disrupting the traditional paradigm of expectations of what Sunday is supposed to be, and then making it what God desires it to be, which is a place of wholeness and healing. So, and we use that term all the time. The church is a hospital for the sick, right? So if that is the case, it needs a recovery unit, or without that, it's just a hospice, right? So why could we not make the Sunday experience recovery unit space through providing tools and conversations around mental health?
Well, my dear sisters and brothers, I want to say to you that this is such a wonderful, marvelous idea. And we've got to remember very, very seriously that we cannot go back to where we were now. The paradigm shift has been monumental. So all gates are open, all possibilities are there. And the fact of the matter is, we've got people who are struggling and stressed. And sometimes, if I'm listening to you all, sometimes they've got a panacea. A follower of a real close friend of mine once said to an Episcopal leader, and the bishop got mad with him, said, look, prayer is not a panacea to cure all ills. At some point, we got to talk with somebody. And another question has come up around that. People believing we can pray away mental illness is what happens here. How can the church play? And I think this is, if you'd expand on it, some of this mental health day could help there. How can the church play an integral role in dispelling stigmas that have passed on through the years about praying away mental concerns?
Yeah, and I think you're modeling it through, platforms like this, and having a conversation like this initiated by a pastor, by a church, to engage around mental health issues and concerns in the midst of the pandemic and social unrest and our inability to gather, models it for other congregations and models it for people to say it's okay and there's nothing to be ashamed of. I think that, one thing I wanted to add, and as much as there are workshops and as much as there are mental health Sundays, there is fundraising to support the work of mental health professionals, right? So because I'm not a mental health professional, nor am I a pastor, I simply have founded a nonprofit. And one of the things that we do is resource professionals and support the work of BlackMentalWellness.com and support the work of Journey of Self-Discovery with Warren and other organizations around the country. Even in this time, as they're leading and providing services, we are in a recession that we haven't really come to grips with. We have millions of people who are unemployed. And so I would imagine that there are people who need some support with even getting the help that they desire. And I've heard people say that, in my conversations, that they can't afford it. So one of the things that can be done is to help supplement that cost so that when they show up at Warren or Nicole's office with a financial need, they've been resourced to help subsidize and take that stress off of people who are really, seeking to get the help that they want to, become more whole.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, brother. Dr. Nicole, Dr. Warren.
I guess I'm going to reiterate what we said. You're not going to spend time just praying away mental illness, but maybe that can be part of the coping. You're also going to do the work that it takes to manage that mental illness. And I do want to recognize that there are, if we think of it like on a spectrum, there are some things that you may be able to manage through therapy and exercise and prayer. And then there are some things that are a little more severe and may require more intensive treatment or medication. And so I think that prayer, again, can be a part of that journey, but we don't want to limit your healing to just one avenue. And I think of it the same way as we think about like cancer treatment, right? Like someone's going to get chemo, and we're going to rally around that person. There are going to be people to drive them to those chemo appointments. You're going to pray for that person and with that person. And that's going to be a part of the healing. And I think we can look at mental health in that same way.
Okay, thank you. Brother Warren, you have anything to add?
Well, I think, we don't necessarily, with prayer, it's not necessarily about coming up with a solution, but prayer could be, take me to the resource. Help me get the resource, the right person, just like, we pray for a right partner. We don't just magically want, the partner show up. We are praying for opportunities that will bring that partner. We are praying for opportunities that, as Romuald is doing through his nonprofit, that would help me get into a good therapist. And we pray that that therapist is what I need to help me to become who God has called me to be. So we can use prayer as part of the process, but using prayer as a pill to just get rid of the mental illness. God can do all things, but most of the time he's challenging us to go through the process. God is not so much focused on just the outcome. He is very present in the process of evolving, of becoming. And that takes work, especially by professionals who understand what living in the valley is about. And we may be struggling with living in the valley. And so praying is to help me go through the valley with the right support, with the right resources to help me get to the mountains, on top of the mountain, on the other side of the valley.
Thank you. Thank you. Sisters and brothers who are viewing and listening online and on the conference call, want to be sure that you know and note that we're going to have contact information up. You can contact Dr. Nicole Kamek at blackmentalwellness.com. I want to be sure you see that, you get that, so that when you want to, and if you want to, you can be in touch with her. Ramal Toon is at ramaltoon.com and clearstoryworks.org, and Discover Your Life Thriving. That's my man. Look at it. And he has a book that he talked about earlier that we shared at the Central United Methodist Church, and we had a wonderful day with him and Dr. Warren Mitchell. Love is an Inside Job. It talks about that cuss word, that bad word, that word I've struggled with for many days, being vulnerable with God, the V word. Oh, it ain't been a good word for me. It's getting better because I'm in therapy. Praise God, praise his holy name. Oh, bless the Lord. It's been a benefit to me, and it's blessed me richly and blessed me much. Brother Warren, we want to be sure we talk about your journey of self-discovery.org. That's where you can contact Brother Warren, journey of self-discovery.org. And sisters and brothers, we want to be sure that you know that we're going to have this time together up on Facebook Live, and we'll on our Facebook page, Central United Methodist Church, and on our YouTube channel that right now is Time Capturer. We want to be sure we do that. Are there any other questions from the community? If there are not, I'm going to ask that our guest, we got another question, excuse me. In our current environment, there's an attack on believing in science. Oh, bless the Lord. How do we as the church reconcile the validity of science in our current non-scientific, we ignore facts environment. In a time when we've tried to make truth and facts relative, perceptions have become fact. How can the church reconcile the validity of science in that context?
Look at the coronavirus numbers and death rates. It's very tangible that this is not a game, that lives are being impacted, and people are actually dying. And yes, more people are living who have, get the virus, but their bodies are changed for the rest of their lives. Athletes who are healthy, who have shown up at practices with, now lifelong lung conditions and heart conditions. I've dealt with people. I've literally heard people say, Jesus is going to have me covered on this, right? And so they're out here in these streets with no mask and no gloves, no nothing, right? And it's heartbreaking for me because I know that they're putting their lives in jeopardy and putting the lives of other people that they love in jeopardy by literally imposing their faith belief on everyone else around them that they come in contact with, that they breathe and Rona on now. But I just I really don't know. Perhaps the therapists have great answers for that, because I really wrestle with it whenever I do leave the house and I see people being so reckless. And my response to myself is, these people were reckless way before coronavirus, right? Coronavirus is just exposing how reckless they were before this. If you're walking out here with no mask on, you didn't just become a reckless human being who didn't care and have a disregard for other people. We just get to see it now. So a part of me gets angry, and a part of me is heartbroken, because typically it's people who look like me. And we're being impacted the most by this for a host of reasons around systemic discrimination, but then also around some of our just own chosen reckless behavior. I have example of it, and I really don't know what a solution is. And I think it does speak to the question of science, because people question the validity. Is it that serious? Can you get it? I don't know anyone who has it. And they're trying to find their own rationale for why they want to do what they want to do. And it actually has nothing to do with science. It's just really they're saying, I want to be selfish.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Nicole, Dr. Warren.
Yeah, I think science is part of the process of venue that God has allowed us to have to get to the source to get to understanding truth and facts. Faith is one of those approaches. When science can't explain stuff and we sense a conviction, we can use our faith to, okay, this is the direction I think I need to go into. But after experiencing faith in a particular area, you're gaining knowledge. That knowledge that puts 1 and 2 together to equal to 3 is science. So whether it be formal science or basic practical science, like I need a job to earn some money to pay for my bills, that's science. These are numbers that we need to take into consideration in order to live our lives. So God isn't against science. God is all for science, and he wants us to become more scientifically in our approach to serving him, in understanding him. And if we have a question, we use that hypothesis as a part of prayer. That, Lord, I don't know how to make A come from B and C. How can you help me with that process? So you use the unknown to help you develop your relationship with the Lord. And the Lord then sends you to another person to help answer that question for you. So science is not just something that's a profession. Science is trying to understand truth using empirical evidence as a way of doing so. Faith is a sort of science in itself. We don't just have blind faith. I'm just going to believe God got me. Where in the world you got that from? That made you think that this is one of the areas that God wants you to have faith in, where he's got you and you don't have to worry about it. That's not.
It's that sprinkle some Jesus on it mentality. It works on everything. It's like paprika or something. I don't know. But I think it's, we choose science when it's comfortable for us, and engineering, and we don't question engineering when we hop on airplanes. We believe engineering, right? And we believe it when we get in a car. So we choose to believe the power of what the brain that God has given us can do when it benefits us. And I think somehow there are people who just don't see how it benefits them and others to be safe. And I can only equate that with selfish. And it's easy. America is built on selfishness. We are conditioned as a society. Everything we look at, it's all about capitalism. Capitalism is driven by individualism and selfishness. And so when the country was never built on the premise of caring for everyone, it was built on caring for some at the expense of others. And somehow we've taken on that same mentality, some of us, of caring for some at the expense of others. That's how the country was built. And so when we say things like wear a mask to protect everybody, that almost sounds un-American to some people, because this country has never cared about everybody. It wasn't built that way. So when we say wear a mask to care for other people, we're saying shift the American story to live into something that is no longer a dream, but a reality, that we now want you to care about every person. That's a whole new story of America.
Wow. Dr. Nicole, we're going to wrap up in a minute, but that's a good thing. The church has to challenge the American story. That's good. That's good, Ramon. Dr. Nicole?
The only thing I'll add, because you two summed that right on up, is that the theme that keeps coming up with the church is about why does it have to be one or the other? And why does choosing one way mean that you're like not choosing God? Why can't in the church we think about, what's the role of science and what's the role of mental health and what's the role of God and Jesus and the church, and have all of that be a part of that conversation? It doesn't have to be an either or. And so the same way with the mask, I put a mask on and I pray before I go outside because I'm afraid, but I'm going to take all of my precautions. I have my hand sanitizer, I have my gloves, I have my mask on, we're gearing up, but I still have faith that I'm going to come back and I'm going to be safe. And so that's something, that I believe in. And I think that's a balance of both worlds.
Okay.
Amen.
Thank you all so very much for a rich evening. We're going to have some closing comments. I'm going to ask Dr. Warren, Dr. Nicole, then Ramal, then I'll close out the evening. Thank you all again so very much. Dr. Warren Mitchell.
Thank you all for having me and being a part of this discussion. Therapy is spirituality. There's no there's no other way about it. Therapy is about helping people to discover themselves, to become whole, to walk in the authority of who God has called them to be, to take hold of the challenges, the problems that they're dealing with, and to make those problems work for them. How can you be used for my good? That's what we're doing in therapy, is so that you can take back ownership that was stolen away or you gave away based on some traumatic or previous experiences that have caused you some mental health issues and trauma. And we're here to support you to live the life that God has called you to. This is who we are. We are ministers in our own right in this realm.
I like that.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Dr. Nicole?
I agree with you. I often share with my clients, I feel like even as a therapist, it's a very spiritual process for me. And that oftentimes I have to stay grounded and centered in who I am. And, praying that God uses me in that moment, that it's not me giving my opinion. It's not me telling someone what to do, but that I'm being led in that process. I'm just a vessel. I'm just here. I have the education and all of that, but I never want to put my personal opinions or beliefs on a person in a place where they're so vulnerable. I think that conversations like this will shift. This is shifting the mental health narrative in the Black community. This is how you do it, by having these discussions, by having the discussions in the church. And I think it's beautiful that you get to see that there are people who look like you, who may have those shared experiences and beliefs that are doing the work. So thank you for having me. It was a pleasure being a part of the conversation.
Thank you so much for being with us. Brother Ramal Toon, my friend, closing remarks from you. Then I'll close.
Again, I just like to thank you, Vance, for initiating this conversation and reaching out and asking if I would connect with Nicole and Warren to do this. And thank you, Nicole and Warren, for saying yes and making time in the evening on your schedules. I know you're quite busy as you shared your stories during this pandemic, and you thought this important enough to put on your schedule. So Vance, just leading by example and modeling how to shift the narrative around faith and therapy is what this session is. The nature of faith and mental health, it has helped me so much to where I just like my life. I feel better. My hard days, I know how to get through them better. My triggers, I know where they come from. I know how to stop myself. I no longer have a daily meditation if I wish somebody would. I don't wake up wanting any trauma or drama with anybody. And the reason I support the work of Warren, Nicole, and others is because I know how much it has helped me truly live into my faith and what the Bible says about me and the life that I can have. I don't have as much baggage getting in my own way of believing that I'm worthy. I'm learning to become more and more worthy by the day. And that's a part of the faith journey. For some of us, our trauma has led us to believe we're not worthy of even the things we want. And so, last thing I'll say on that is, I have a tattoo of a scripture that I live by out of, Isaiah 61:3, where he says, God will give you joy for mourning, praise for despair, and beauty for ashes. And understanding that that's an exchange, joy for mourning, beauty for ashes, So oftentimes I wanted God to bless my ashes, and rather than surrender them. And I wanted beauty, but I wanted it on top of the ashes. And I think therapy helped me to find ways to surrender the ashes to receive beauty. And I think that that's what this journey is. And that's a big part of the value of engaging a therapist to teach you the power of surrender and the blessing of healing to live a life that's thriving. So again, just thank all three of you for this space in your time.
Thank you, Ramon. Thank you, Dr. Nicole. Thank you, Warren Mitchell. Thank you to he's unseen, Pastor Willie Nelson, who's been our producer tonight. Thanks to the staff at Central Church, Pastor Angela Johnson, Ms. Sherry Simon, Reverend Mildred Gunn, and all those on our leadership team who were part of being sure that this happened. Wednesday Wellness has come as a response to the pandemic and all that's been going on with the pandemic. We wanted to be sure tonight, especially though, that we took a special time to give you opportunities to engage these professionals and one who uplifts their work, Ramal Toon, people who love Black people, who respect and love the church. Contact information is there. You will see it. If you can get back to YouTube, you can get back to Facebook, and you'll see that these will be uploaded for you to do that again. We're looking for to be in contact with them. And we want you to know that we hope to do this again in October. We want to hear from you if you found this is something good. Elections are coming up. Holidays will be coming up. We pray that this madness with the police will end and all this violence. But in the midst of all this, we're looking to do our part to make sure that what we do in Wednesday Wellness, help and hope, wholeness for wellness, continues to happen for you. Thank you again for being with us tonight. On behalf of all the good people at the Central United Methodist Church, where I am peacock proud and hallelujah happy to be the senior pastor, I thank you so very much for being with us tonight. Be sure you take good care. Keep the faith. Be safe. Wear your mask. As always, be well. Good night. God bless. Bye now.